Legacy is an eternal format alongside Vintage. Since Vintage demands hard to acquire cards, Legacy became the most popular of the two for being less restrictive for new players to join. Less restrictive? Coming from Pauper, this sentence is silly. I mean, everything is relative, and while a Legacy deck will cost you an arm and a leg, a Vintage deck is a financial decision that'll ruin you for generations to come. Legacy is lunacy, but so is most of the Magic formats nowadays. After having played Legacy for a while, I will say it is fun, and I fell in love with what some would call Legacy's most difficult deck. So let's talk about Legacy's fastest combo deck, Doomsday. Winning with Doomsday is a 3-step plan. Step 1. Get your hand on Doomsday. You can't be guaranteed to have Doomsday in your opening hand, so you need to dig for it. One way to do it is with cantrips such as Ponder or Brainstorm, and of course we have good old personal tutor that lets us find any sorcery and put on top of our deck. Step 2. Make sure Doomsday resolves using discard spells to get counter spells out of our opponent's hand. Having counter spells ourselves such as Force of Will or Daze, which are free counter spells. When Doomsday resolve, we'll get to pick 5 cards from our library or discard, and those become our new library. Everything else from those places is exile. We also lose half our life, which can be very important. Step 3. Make a pile that wins the game. Let's look at how to do this step. Doomsday in opening hand. Play land. Fetch land. Play Lotus Petal. Play Dark Ritual. Play Doomsday. Have Daze in hand. Don't need. Pick 5 cards to be my library. We need a way to draw the first card, which I will use Edge of Autumn, sacrificing a lion to cycle a card. Then I use the Lotus Petal to cast a Brainstorm that was on top of my library, drawing 3 cards. I put 2 back and play this Lion's Eye Diamond. I then cycle a Street Wraith. With the draw on the stack, I sacrifice my Lion's Eye Diamond, make 3 blue and discard my hand, use 1 blue and consider, surveil 1 card into my graveyard that I put there with Brainstorm, and then the final card is Thassa's Oracle. Thassa's Oracle, also known as Authorical, wins the game if you have less cards in your library than you have blue mana symbols on things you control. Which means when you play Thassa's Oracle, if you have no cards in the library, you win the game. Amazing. So this pile wins the game right away. If you play Doomsday, have an extra mana and can play the whole pile. This kind of hand is I have a turn 1 win. Can you do anything about it hand? Question mark. But what if they did have a Force of Will? What if they had 2 Force of Wills? So now we ask ourselves, what happens if we can't win turn 1? What if there's a turn 2? Well, let's take a look at an actual game. My opponent plays a land, and I have to remember step 1 is to find Doomsday. So I play a land, and then I play Personal Tutor. I could have also searched with Brainstorm and Ponder, but Personal Tutor is guaranteed to give it to me next turn, as it can find a sorcery and put it on top of my deck, find Doomsday to put it on top of my deck, and my opponent fetches a Surveil land. My opponent is playing blue, so I have to worry about Force of Will for once I want to do step 2, which is resolving my Doomsday. I'm lucky, however, that for my opponent's second turn, he does choose to tap out because he needs to play a Brainstorm. He's probably either looking for free counter spells to get rid of my Doomsday when I counter it, or he's looking for a second land, I hope. The good news for me is, even if he finds a Force of Will, I have a Force of Will as well and a blue card in hand, so I'm not that scared. The only problem is if my opponent has 2 Force of Wills, but then he won't have many cards left in his hand and maybe I can find anyone. Turn 2, I try to cast Dark Ritual, it's fine, and then I cast my Doomsday. As predicted, my opponent has a Force of Will, but so do I, and I hope it's enough to actually get to resolve my Doomsday. A match worth looking at if it was just me Doomsdaying and winning right away. So of course my opponent has a second Force of Will, pitching a Quantum Riddler. And I'm starting to think I know what this deck is. It's some sort of blink deck. I play a Cavern of Souls as my second land, naming Wizards, so my Wizards can't be counterspelled. My opponent passes the turn with 2 mana open, I pass the turn, and my opponent plays the dog! Failure the Exuberant Shepherd, Magic's best girl. It's a 2/2 with flash for 2 mana that when it attacks, you can exile another non-land permanent and return it to its owner control at the end of the turn. If you control that permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So it's a threat because it can beat me to death. Anyways, I play a Brainstorm because I have to find myself a new Doomsday and the mana to cast it somehow. My opponent uses 2 mana to warp in a Quantum Riddler. That means he can play it for just 2 mana, but at the end of the turn it goes back to exile. But if you blink it with the dog, it does no longer warp into exile. So I have to counter this using another Force of Will, pitching my Brainstorm because it's my only blue card. It's great that I got rid of Quantum Riddler. It's a huge problem that I no longer have any spells in hand and my opponent has a 2-2 that's slowly whittling down my life. I find a fetch land on top of my deck thanks to a Ponder, and I need lands because I need to get 3 black mana to be able to cast Doomsday, and the fetch land also gets to shuffle the rest of the cards that I don't want away. That way I can find myself an Underground Sea, and then hopefully have the luck of the draw on my side next turn. I do only have 1 land in hand right now, but my opponent only has 2 cards as well. Well, 3 after the draw, but hopefully nothing too powerful. He attacks me and I go down to 13, and then he plays Tamiyo, which is a scary card. The fact that he doesn't play a land means he has something. Luckily I have a Brainstorm, so hopefully I can find a Doomsday and a land from this. Oh my god, that's a Doomsday and a Swamp. Everything I wanted, and a way to draw, and a counter spell. What more can a girl ask for? It's actually so difficult putting cards back that it takes me a while, but I end up putting the Cycler and the counter spell back. Cavern of Souls can't make black mana for Doomsday, but it's a good thing to not cast it right now anyway, because if I cast it next turn, I can have a daze ready for it, as well as a way to draw directly after I cast Doomsday. For my opponent's turn, he plays a land and then attacks with both his creatures. When Tamiyo attacks, it creates a clue for you, and the dog can then blink Tamiyo, who would do 0 damage anyway, and when Tamiyo returns, you'll also get a plus counter on their best girl. We already failed step 2 once. We played a Doomsday that got countered by 2 Force of Wills. Our opponent could have another Force of Will in hand or some sort of counter spell, and all I have is a Daze, and Daze says it only counters a thing unless an opponent plays 1. And my opponent has 3 mana open, so it's unlikely it'll save me. But anyways, we go for a Doomsday. My opponent cracks the clue to find some sort of 1 mana counter spell or a Force of Will, and he finds nothing. It resolved. I lose half my life, and now I have to find 5 cards and make that my library and find a way to win it. Because this is step 3. Make a pile that wins. I've made my pile of 5 cards, and my opponent's looking through my exile zone to see if he can figure out what's in those 5 cards. At least see if I have any Force of Wills or anything else that could possibly interrupt his ways of interrupting me and winning the game. My opponent finds an island after fetching, and I am down to 5 life, but that dog only hits for 3, and it's most likely I will win the game next turn. My opponent doesn't have anything in hand that can stop it if I play Thassa's next turn. He attacks, gaining a clue and dealing 3 damage to me. Honestly, I've forgotten how low I was. I'm all the way down to 2 life. I'm not used to having a card that says you lose half your life, even though I have played this a lot by now. I also don't know what my opponent has in hand. All I know is he plays blue, but it's unlikely he has any counter spells since he used all of them on Doomsday and this time chose to let Doomsday resolve. He gets another counter on the dog and it now has 4 power, and I have 1 turn before that dog eats me. All of this combined made me make a very bad mistakes for this pile. I start by playing a Ponder to crack my Doom pile. But the problem here is I'm at 2 life, so I can't cycle any of my Street Wraith because that costs 2 life to do. I did put both of my Edge of Autumns into the pile, but I also put 2 cantrips that cost 1 blue each. Because one of my lands is a swamp that doesn't make blue, I can't play the Thassa's Oracle at the bottom of my deck. I could have fixed this by putting Consider on the top of my pile instead of the Ponder. That way I could have milled 1 card, cycle twice, and then get the Thassa's and play it. Even if I still had 1 card left in my library, that's fine. I don't think my opponent has any removal anyway. But I went for a pile that draws the whole pile before I can play Thassa's. That was my mistake. I sacrificed this land to draw another card, and now I have to play this Consider to draw Thassa's Oracle. I can't pass the turn because I'm at 2 life and I will be attacked by failure and I will lose the game. So I've created a pile that can't win. I didn't think enough when I made this pile. I could even have made a basic pile to just win right away. But I tried to make this pile instead because I got stressed about life. This is why the deck is difficult. I know basic piles, but I still get into a situation where my life is so low I need to think harder about what I do with the mana I have. I have to pass the turn and go. Game 2, and I have the same play as last time. I start with an Underground Sea, playing a personal tutor to put Doomsday on top of my library. I pass the turn, my opponent draws, plays a land, cuts my library, and passes the turn back to me. Now, I don't have a Dark Ritual, so I can't go for a Doomsday right now, so I have to just play an island. I can play a Lion's Eye Diamond, which can be good to have in play, and then I play a Ponder, so I can look for either fast mana or more land. Lion's Eye Diamond is good to have if I want to make a same turn win pile with my Doomsday, because then I can make fast mana and just put a draw onto the stack and then draw my whole library and slam the Thassa's Oracle. It's however not great because I am already going to look for my third land, so I might not need the extra fast mana it provides. And it's just a dead card in my hand. I should probably have kept it in my hand and tried to put it away with a Brainstorm if I could. My opponent sacrifices the fetch land, finds a Metallurgic Archive, which lets them surveil 1, which is a good way to look for like a counterspell for my Doomsday if they need it. It is kind of interesting to try and think about how my opponent is thinking currently. He knows I have Doomsday in hand. Does he also know I probably don't want to use a Dark Ritual to get it countered? Or is he thinking I'm stuck on mana? Anyways, here's my Brainstorm I should have shuffled my Lion's Eye Diamond back in with. For me, this Brainstorm is really good because I also have a fetch land, which will allow me to put 2 cards back and then shuffle them away. It would have been really good if one of those cards had been Lion Eye Diamond, since I don't seem to need it for my piling if I'm gonna be at like 4 mana when I cast it. Then I cast Night's Whisper. It costs me 2 life and I draw 2 cards. It's my only spell that really makes card advantage, and it's really good to get when I have Force of Will, so I don't go a card down with it. I then pass the turn, my opponent fetch, and cast Narset. Narset is a huge problem because it says I can only draw 1 card each turn, and I really need to draw a lot of cards in a single turn when I play Doomsday, so I use my Force of Will to try and get rid of it. However, my force is met by his force, which counters my force, so the Narset resolves. Hopefully my opponent doesn't have any more Force of Wills, because then I can at least resolve my Doomsday next turn. But there's a bigger problem. Narset not only says I can only draw 1 card each turn, making it harder to get through my pile, she also finds a counter spell for my opponent. And he finds a Force of Negation, which on my turn can counter my Doomsday, even exile it. I find another land, and I fetch my fetch land to go find another Underground Sea, and now I have 3 black mana to cast my Doomsday. My opponent responds with Surgical Extraction, targeting one of the Force of Wills in my graveyard. This will exile all Force of Wills from my hand, library, and graveyard. This means if I have a Force of Will in hand, I can't use it to counter my opponent's Force of Negation. Lucky for me, I don't have a Force of Will on hand. I have another Doomsday that I can then cast next turn, and most likely this one will then be countered by the Force of Negation I saw. Then I just have to pray that the next one doesn't get countered. My opponent then uses Force of Negation on the Doomsday I have on the stack, exiling it. At least it's a 2-for-1, so there's less chance my opponent has another free counterspell. And I'm not sure if they're running any counterspell they can play for mana, because this deck seems full of stuff at this point. The Narset ticks down, trying to find another spell, and I have to hope it's not a counterspell, because I need this Doomsday to resolve if I'm gonna have any chance. Step 2 is making sure Doomsday resolves, and right now that's dependent on my opponent not finding any more counterspells. He does find a Force of Will, and this is looking very grim for me now. My opponent then casts a Brainstorm, drawing 3 cards, having to put 2 back. I know my opponent already has a Force in hand. Now they expended a blue card to improve the quality of their hand, so there's a chance perhaps they don't have a blue card now, though it is unlikely seeing as how most of their deck is blue. But I know they also play the Dog, which is white, so there is a small chance, I guess. My opponent fetches and now goes down to 3 card hands, but also draws a card off of the Teferi they played. Teferi is also a problem, because now I can only play at sorcery speed, meaning I have to only play spells at sorcery speed, and I can only draw 1 card each turn. Somehow my Doomsday does resolve, even though my opponent has a Force of Will in hand. Most likely anyway, unless they shuffled it away with the Brainstorm and Fetch land. But I don't think they did, because they searched for it. So either they don't have a blue card in hand to pitch to it, or that blue card is too important to use to pitch to the Force of Will. Now I have to make a pile that not only can win even though my draws are limited by an asset, I can't put any counter spells in it because of the Teferi only allowing me to play spells at sorcery speed, meaning I can't use counter spells for anything. And I have to play around that force of will I know my opponent has in hand. This is when the game gets really difficult to play. Whatever pile I've made has to be perfect. For my opponent's turn, he simply plays a land and passes the turn to me. He now has 5 mana he can use on a Force of Will if he doesn't play anything else. But I have one leg up my sleeve here. I can cycle this Street Wraith in my opponent's end step because it's not a spell, so it goes through Teferi, but I will go down to 6. But I get through my pile faster like this, so it's good. I can't play any counter spells, so I haven't put any in my pile because of the Teferi. However, there's a sorcery that kind of functions like a counter spell, and that's my Thoughtseize. So I've put Thoughtseize in my pile to take a look at my opponent's hand and figure out what could possibly be in it and get rid of it. My opponent fetches, finding a 5th land, tapping 5 mana to play a Force of Will on that Thoughtseize to protect the hand, and I have to try and think what could my opponent now have left. And then I pass the turn. My opponent uses Teferi, so they can cast sorceries at instant speed, so there's no more reason for them to do anything in their own turn. Then in my opponent's end step, even though they have a Teferi, I cast a spell that surveils one and draws a card. I choose to put a Thoughtseize into my graveyard and then draw a card off of the Consider. My opponent allows it, even though they have an active Teferi Time Raveler, and I think we're both just forgetting, this is illegal. This is not supposed to happen. On my turn, I then cast Thassa's Oracle, and it gets Force of Will, pitching something, and then I use Unearth to bring it back, and my opponent then has a Consign to Memory that counters the trigger on the Thassa's Oracle, so I don't win the game, and I have no more cards, so I lose. It's kind of wild how much cheating I just did there. It's even wilder that if I hadn't milled that Thoughtseize into my graveyard, I could have won this game, I think. So, first off, let's ignore the fact that I cast a spell on my opponent's end step while Teferi was there to say,
You can only cast spells anytime you could cast a sorcery.
I'm 100% sure I didn't do that on purpose. It's still embarrassing to do that on camera. The more interesting thing is talking about that final pile, because if I hadn't surveilled that Thoughtseize into the graveyard, I could have played it, then I play Thassa's and they have to consign it, and then I revive it and they have nothing left. And I could have won both of those games if I had made slightly better piles. This is why I'm starting to learn that this is a very difficult deck to play. Magic is difficult, this deck is extremely difficult, and you know what? I love it. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, pet your dog, hug your mom, all those things. Anyways, bye!